Well, hello, friends, neighbors. John, your whiskey neighbor here. Welcome down the duck. It's Sunday, so we're going to shoot a couple of samples, and I've got a couple of big bourbon samples, again from Ray out of Texas, and I can't wait to talk to you about Sam Houston. They just have numbers on him, but Sam Houston, the 14-year-old expression, I think it was released for Texas, and then we'll look at Remus. This is the Remus, the fifth release. So we'll talk Sam Houston, 14-year-old, Remus, fifth release, which is, that 13 to 16-year-old bourbon. When we get back, if you have any, a little bit older bourbon, something a little bit bolder or a little bit with a bit of age on it, why don't you pour some of that and come on back and we'll talk a couple of bourbon samples. 3, 4. Well, thanks for joining me. Really can't thank Ray enough to bring in some of these samples that I just can't get in my market. So the first one we're going to look at is Sam Houston. Now, I did as any decent person would do, quick search, who's Sam Houston, and realized there's a lot about Texas I don't know. So Sam Houston was, president of the Republic of Texas a couple of times, but also governor of Tennessee and Texas, and as I said, clearly a respected politician, but I don't know enough of the history to try to unpack why they named this. But who's behind this is the Western Spirits Brewing Company, and they release a variety of different bourbons and spirits, and this is sort of a small batch. I believe they release these either from 2 barrels or 3 barrels. This particular one, as I said, is 14 years, 49% ABV. It's, all I remember is 18% rye, but probably about 74 corn, 18 rye. And the balance in barley came from 3 barrels. And I believe it was released specifically for the Texas market. So decent age, 14 years, good rye, 18%. Let's see how the bourbon goes. Good bourbon nose. This one is a little less fruiting for me, a little more spicy. So a variety of spices, a little bit of, cinnamons, light pepper. There is some vanilla in there and some toffees, but it really comes off a little bit spice forward. I could add some layers that were on that dry edge. It's a little too early to say cocoa, but something a little nut husk, that kind of thing. Yeah, I could go with that. A little drying, a little spicy, but it's funny how when I say drying, it often makes my mouth water when I get that kind of spice bouquet in a bourbon. Let's try it on the palate. Cheers. Boy, that played well on the palate. Just nice. Again, a little more kind of a sweet vanilla with spicy, I shouldn't say that too much, with some cinnamon, light pepper, a bit of something savory. I'm going to say clove, but it's not quite clove. It's something else. And a decent amount of oak. Oak is definitely, the stage we're set on, and now I'm getting into the early finish. It's coming back. Fruiting is very light, maybe a bit of dried apple. Let's try it again. That time I got a little more, almost a smoky char, a little more oak. Leaning into the fruit that I chose. Little dried apple pieces that have been, rolled in cinnamon, a little bit of butter. It's not overly buttery, but there's a little bit of that nice kind of creamy coating that helps bring it together. And fairly drying. On the long finish, we're back into some charred oak. I know when I pick up a flavor note, especially when I'm just trying it for the first time, I say it a few too many times with you guys. However, I would say this is a really well oaked, not over oaked, that tends to be a little more cinnamon, a little more light pepper, and the fruiting gentle dried apple, kind of bringing it together on some kind of a roasted walnut or something like that. Nice stuff. So now on to this Repeal Batch 5. Remus Repeal Batch 5. Named after George Remus. I still don't know enough about that person, but that's a legend in the bourbon industry right through Prohibition, and at the end of it, what a character. You look up that name online and you get a variety of a positive and more crook-like sides of that person in history. But I haven't had any of the Remus Repeal releases. I know, as this is the 5th, there's a number out there, but they're not in my market, so I haven't had them at all. So this is great to finally try, MGP's premium release. I believe Luxotto is the one who's releasing it or putting it together, but this is clearly MGP liquid. This one, and I'll put it down below, has quite an interesting mix of 16-year-old and then all the way up to about 13-year-old. Most of it is 13-year-old, but high rye. It's in the low 30s. I said high rye and then low 30s, but is it 30, 32, 31, 36% rye? I'll put it down below. But it's very high rye, mostly that 13-year-old, but it goes all the way back to some 16-year-old, and I think the 16-year-old might have been about 21% rye. So it's 21 to 36% rye, and the age is from 16 years to 13. But I've wanted to try this sort of older, aged MGP because I tend to like MGP rye. So let's see what I get out of this bourbon. I know I'm saying a lot about the rye, but it is a bourbon. Those were just the percentages of rye, balanced in corn and some malted barley. Let's try it on the nose and the palate. So in comparison to the Sam Houston, it is sweeter, a little more light toffees, a little more nice sugared caramels. And the fruiting is either a sweeter apple or we could move into sort of a dark cherry. It's not a bright cherry for me, but there's a bit more fruiting and a little more sweetness on the nose. Let's try it on the palate. Cheers. That is a lovely bourbon too. Considering its age, I actually expected more oak, but I was getting more oak and dry spices from the Sam Houston. This one for me absolutely has some of that oak, but I'm also getting more brightly peppers, more spicing, more hot cinnamons, and then that candied sweetness, that candied red apple, that kind of thing where it is a higher sweetness mixed with a little more peppery, and then the oak kind of sings it all together. Better try another sip, mostly because I'm enjoying both these bourbon samples. Yeah, second sip there brought a little more char and oak. In this case, it actually brought a little bit of bitterness on it. So I still stay with that higher sweetness, cracked sugar kind of thing. But now when the oak comes back, it's got a little bit of oak tannic bitterness. I like both of these samples. These are great to try, and what a gift, Ray. Just sitting here just right now, even though this has some older things and definitely has more heat, more pepper, and I usually like a lot of pepper. Probably if I was in more of a rye mood, I would go in this direction. Clearly it has more rye for my palate. And in this case, when I say rye, I mean more of that spicy, hot, peppery nature. And then we get the oaks, and there's still the sugars and high sweetness. But this was a really nice, leathered, oaked, simpler spice profile. Not the variety that I had here. But I'm drawn a little bit more to the Sam Houston today than I am the Remus, although both of these are awesome. And certainly I would consider a bottle of either of these if it showed up in my market. Thanks. Thanks for joining me here. Thanks for hosting the conversation. If you've had either one or any of the Remus series or any of like the Sam Houstons, I think they started with a 12-year-old, so there's a variety of these out there. Why don't you throw some comments down below? Do you like them? Have you started to like them and now you like them less? Why not start a conversation? So thanks for joining me here. Hope you had a great Sunday and have a fantastic work week ahead.